similar sort of dynamic in that you know the person or the people that are going to judge this work that you're writing. That, of course, can't help but influence the decisions that you make during the writing process. If you have an especially forceful editor at a publisher pushing a certain issue or something, or thinking that you should cover something that you're not, then you're going to tend to cover that, right, to please the editor. And it's sort of similar dynamic with the dissertation committee.
Does the dissertation committee often come back to you with points they want fixed or clarified?
Absolutely. You tend to have a fair amount of interaction with your dissertation committee, or at least your dissertation advisor, throughout the process. Once you have a first chapter done, you would submit that and get feedback, sort of give them an outline of where you plan to go from there. They give you thoughts on that. So you do get a lot of feedback throughout the process. But you can, at the end, you do have to defend the dissertation in a public forum. The dissertation committee meets with you, and it can be a public event at many universities where they call you to task on these ideas, and you're expected to be able to clarify them.
What do you like most about writing? What do you like the least?
What I like best is the finished product and also seeing people interact with the writing. So, for example, that's a very blog type of thing. When I write on the blog, I often get instant feedback. If I write the piece a day or two before, then it goes up, comments start coming in, or I start getting emails or comments on Twitter. That, for me, is the best part of writing, at least on the blog. The worst part I found about writing for the blog is the propensity of a number of readers to oversimplify an argument that I might be making so that it's more easily open to criticism. That happens a lot on history blogs. It tends to happen a lot on Twitter because there's a 140 character limit. Hard to have a multi-layered discussion on Twitter, yet historians insist on trying to do it, and things get lost in translation all the time. One of the things that I like the least about writing for the blog is how often I tend to be either misinterpreted, misconstrued, or just flat out misrepresented.
You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't.
Yeah, and so in some sense that is exactly the case. I have decided to forge ahead with it because I have found, for me personally, and I think for most of the other members of the blog, that the benefits far outweigh the bad involved in writing for it.
Do you consider yourself just as much of a writer as a novelist would?
That is a very interesting question. That's a very tough question. I would suspect that the answer to that question is different for each historian. Before I started doing a PhD and before I even started at college, I was a songwriter and a musician, and I've done creative writing for most of my life before sort of going into academic writing. And so I tend to read historians and also think of my own work in a creative sense, right? And so I think that I probably do think like a novelist in certain ways when I'm writing academic history. I tend to write slightly more narrative, at least chronological based history than many people do in the academy nowadays. So I'm very concerned about telling a story, the mechanics of that, the mechanics of getting this story across while also making a larger argument and how that all ties together. That's also a concern for historians who do biography. I haven't done any biography. I think I would like to. There's also the sense of character development there. Fiction writing tends to have that many people think academic writing doesn't have, or a palatable style. And that can be in the sense of language, in the flow of a writer's prose. And I tend to be very much aware of that when I'm doing academic writing. That doesn't mean that my dissertation will come out reading like a novel. Hopefully will mean that it comes out a little bit less like a dissertation than some of the more notorious examples of that form of writing. But you try very hard to take the best of both forms and combine them while leaving behind the worst of both.
Do you ever see yourself being a writer full-time?
No, I actually don't. I think that my goal doing the PhD is to be a university professor. Ideal scenario, I would be able to do both my research and my writing while also being able to teach the 18th century and the American Revolution to undergraduates. That, for me, is the ideal scenario. And I think a lot of historians will tell you that they learn a lot more than they teach when they're teaching undergraduates, and that their own work, their own research, and their own writing benefits greatly from their teaching experiences. I don't know that I would ever want to do only one or the other. I would rather do both and have them both benefit by feeding off each other.
Michael Hattam, thank you so much for being with me today on the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast. I know my listeners will enjoy your interview.
My pleasure, Adam. Thank you.
If you're looking for a community of like-minded individuals who can offer support, tools, and advice about how you can start your own adventures in writing, prepare to have the cauldron of your imagination stirred. I started the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast for one purpose: to do everything I can to get your voice heard about your writing and get more eyes on your books. My goal is to do whatever it takes to help you achieve the success you so richly deserve.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast, located at eatsleepwrite.net. Please send any questions, comments, or suggestions to comments@eatsleepwrite.net. Please consider a donation to support the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast. Donations can be sent to our PayPal address at donations@eatsleepwrite.net. Once in a lifetime, the theme music for the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast, courtesy of Stephen Paul. All rights reserved, used by permission. Please join us again for the next edition of the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast.